The wind swept through the Appalachian Mountains that morning, cold, sharp, and endless. A weary veteran and his loyal dog trudged through the snow, hungry, lost, and out of tomorrows. Then, the dog stopped. His ears caught a sound beneath the frozen ground, faint, steady, like a heartbeat buried in the earth. Moments later, steam rose from the snow, a whisper of warmth where none should exist. What they found that day wasn't gold or luck. It was life, a hidden spring that would heal a man, a town, and maybe even the world around it. Because sometimes miracles don't fall from the sky, they rise quietly from the ground. Before we begin, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments, and if you still believe in second chances, hit subscribe. The morning lay pale and brittle over the Appalachian Ridge, a cold wind gnawing at the pines until their branches whispered like bones. A thin crust of snow glazed the valley floor, catching the weak light of late November. Everything felt half asleep. The hills, the frozen stream, even the sky sagging under a low gray weight that promised more snow before nightfall. Michael Weaver drove an old rust-bitten pickup along the winding road that cut through Gray Hollow. The heater had died 2 winters ago, and the breath rising from his lips fogged the cracked windshield with each exhale. 46 years had carved quiet trenches around his eyes, the kind that come not from age alone, but from things a man chooses not to speak of. His hair, chestnut brown streaked with early silver, curled slightly at the collar of his jacket. The beard he kept trimmed short framed a face that had learned to live with disappointment the way stone learns to live with weather, by not fighting it. Beside him, Buddy, the only heartbeat he trusted, shifted on the torn passenger seat. The German Shepherd's coat was a blend of black and rich brown, dense enough to trap bits of melting frost. His amber eyes scanned the road with the awareness of a soldier on patrol, every flicker of motion reflected in their surface. Buddy was 6 now, trained once to detect explosives in another desert far away, where the air burned instead of froze. Somewhere along the line, both man and dog had been decommissioned, one officially, one quietly. The truck coughed, shuddered, and settled into silence. Michael coasted it to the shoulder, the tires crunching over ice. He sat for a moment with the engine dead and the world pressing close. The radio's faint hum dissolved into static. From the glove box, he pulled a can of beans, its label half peeled. 2 cans left after this one. He'd learned to stretch hunger into patience. "Guess we're walking again, Bud," he murmured. Buddy's ears twitched at his name, and he hopped down from the seat, paws sinking into the snow. The dog's breath puffed white clouds into the thin air. Michael slung his canvas duffel over one shoulder and started along the road. The mountains here were the kind that didn't care if you noticed them. They rose slow and patient, a sea of gray-green pines and black stone. Michael had served 2 tours as a combat engineer, trained to build and to break things, bridges, barricades, people's trust in permanence. After returning home, he'd built nothing that lasted. His marriage had splintered under silence. The job at the steel yard had evaporated with the last recession. Each loss had stripped something away until only Buddy remained, steady as a shadow. By mid-morning, the wind had turned sharper. Snow flurries danced across the road in thin, teasing sheets. That was when Michael saw the sign. Cabin for sale, $70. The paint had flaked almost to nothing, but the words clung on stubbornly, nailed, to a post leaning toward the ditch. Below the sign, an arrow pointed down a narrow trail half buried in snow. He stopped. $70, he muttered. That's less than the gas we burned getting here. He had $93 in his wallet, a small pension check cashed 2 days ago. A sensible man would keep moving, find town before dark, maybe trade labor for a warm bed. But the idea of ownership, even of something broken, caught at him. He looked at Buddy, who was sniffing the air, tail motionless. "What do you think, soldier? Worth a look?" Buddy gave a low rumble, not quite a bark, more an agreement. Michael smiled for the first time in days. "All right then." The trail wound downhill between stands of pine and maple stripped bare for winter. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crunch of boots and the occasional creak of branches. After half a mile, the trees opened into a small clearing. There, half hidden by rock and shadow, sat the cabin. It was built directly into the mouth of a cave, the front made of timber darkened by age and rain. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney, and a film of frost clung to the windows. A narrow wooden bridge crossed a shallow stream that ran past the entrance, its water not frozen but steaming faintly, as if exhaling in the cold. Michael stopped on the bridge. The warmth rising from the stream touched his face like breath. "That's strange," he whispered. Buddy stepped forward, sniffing at the vapor, then looked back at him with questioning eyes. Michael reached down to pat his head. "Looks like the Earth's got secrets left after all." A voice broke the stillness. "You here for the sale?" He turned. Two figures were approaching from the tree line, a man and a woman, bundled in county-issue parkas. The man was short, mid-50s, with a clipboard tucked under one arm and a permanent squint from years spent reading small print outdoors. His name tag read R. Coleman. The woman beside him, Sarah Linwood, was taller, perhaps 40, with a narrow face and wind-reddened cheeks. Her hair was tied back under a knit cap, and she carried a thermos in both hands like it contained the only warmth she owned. "Depends what's for sale," Michael said. Coleman checked his papers. "Foreclosure lot. Old property left behind after the owner passed. Cave house, no utilities, probably not up to code." Sarah offered a small, tired smile. "It's been sitting empty 2 winters now. Nobody bid last time. You'd be doing the county a favor." Michael studied her. There was a softness behind her eyes. Kindness, maybe, or pity carefully disguised as professionalism. She looked like someone who'd seen too many desperate people come and go and learned not to expect much. Coleman cleared his throat. "Minimum bid $70, payable today. Comes with a key, a map, and no guarantees." Michael laughed under his breath. "No guarantees? That about sums it up, doesn't it?" Sarah's expression flickered. "Sometimes no guarantees means no expectations," she said quietly. "That can be a kind of freedom." He looked at her again, then down at Buddy, whose head tilted as if weighing the same thought. "All right," he said finally. "70 it is." Coleman blinked, surprised. "You're serious?" Michael pulled his worn wallet from the inner pocket of his jacket. The bills were folded neatly, the way soldiers learned to keep things ready for inspection. He hesitated for a second, feeling the weight of every dollar like it might be his last act of faith. Then he counted out 70 and handed them over. Coleman scribbled on his form, tore off a carbon copy, and passed it to Michael along with a key whose brass had gone green at the edges. "It's yours. Best of luck." When they left, Sarah lingered a moment. She reached into her coat and handed Michael a folded piece of paper. "There's a gas station about 6 miles north. They close early, and—" She hesitated. The last owner's name was Elijah Drew. Local fisherman, kind man. Used to say this place had a good heart. Michael accepted the note. "Doesn't seem like hearts last long in these hills." Sarah's eyes softened. "Some do. They just hide where the cold can't reach them." Then she turned and followed Coleman back into the trees. He watched until they disappeared, the snow swallowing their footprints. Then he looked at the cabin again. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and the roof sagged where the beams had bowed inward. Yet, for all its decay, something about it felt alive. Buddy padded across the bridge and stopped at the threshold, tail swaying gently. He looked back once, as if asking permission. Michael followed, pushing the door open. It gave with a groan, the smell of damp pine and ashes long gone cold rolling out. The air inside smelled of damp pine, and ashes long gone cold, mixed with a faint mineral warmth from the nearby stream. Dust floated like slow snow in the dim light. There was a table, a chair, and a fireplace blackened by years of forgotten fires. He set his duffel down, struck a match, and lit a small pile of twigs in the hearth. The flame caught, weak but stubborn, casting orange light across the walls. Buddy lay down by the fire, sighing as if he'd been waiting all his life for this moment. Michael sat beside him, staring into the flickering light. His fingers brushed the edge of the key in his pocket. For $70, he thought, he'd bought a door that might finally open towards something instead of away. Outside, the stream whispered through the snow, its warmth turning mist into ribbons of silver smoke. Michael closed his eyes and listened, not sure if it was the water or his own pulse echoing in the quiet. He reached over and rested a hand on Buddy's back. "Maybe this is where we stop running, huh?" The dog's tail thumped once against the floorboards. Michael leaned back against the cold wall and let the rhythm of the stream fill the silence between heartbeats. He didn't know what forgiveness sounded like, but as the stream whispered through the night, he began to believe it might be quiet. Morning came gray and thin, spilling over the mouth of the cave like smoke rolling off cold stone. The world outside was still, no footprints but his own, no sound except the faint murmur of the warm stream threading through frost and pine. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of smoke, stone, and memory. Michael woke slowly, bones aching but lighter than the night before. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Then the soft crackle of dying embers, the steady sound of Buddy's breathing, and the whisper of running water told him he was still here, still alive. Buddy stretched beside the hearth, his thick sable coat catching the weak dawn light. Frost glimmered on the window frame, turning the outside world into a silver blur. The dog nudged Michael's arm with his muzzle, then padded to the door, tail flicking once. "All right," Michael muttered, voice rough with sleep. "Let's see what we got ourselves into." He stepped outside. The air bitted his lungs, dry and sharp. Mist rose from the stream and curled between the pines, wrapping the cabin in slow ribbons of light. The building looked even smaller than he remembered, half buried in the mountain, its roof green with moss, the porch sagging under the weight of snow. Michael ran a hand over the rough timber. "Guess we'll have to earn our stay, huh?" Buddy answered with a short huff, as if in agreement. Behind the cabin stood a small shed leaning toward collapse. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Old tools hung from nails, some broken, some just tired of waiting. He picked up a hammer with a loose handle, tested its weight, and found a small box of nails fused together by rust. He checked for leaks near the chimney first. Instincts of a builder never died. Michael smiled faintly at the thought. Some habits stick harder than promises. He climbed onto the roof, prying away rotten boards and replacing them with scraps from the shed. The cold bit at his fingers, but his movements were steady, methodical. Each strike of the hammer echoed through the hollow like a heartbeat, faint, patient, alive. By noon, the roof no longer sagged. The cabin might not be pretty, but it was holding. Inside, Buddy was nosing around the corners, occasionally sniffing and pawing at the floor. Then he stopped, ears pricked, tail rigid. He scratched at one of the planks near the hearth. "What's that, boy?" Michael knelt beside him and wedged the hammer claw beneath the floorboard. The wood groaned as he pried it up. Beneath the plank, half buried in dirt and dust, lay a small metal chest, its edges furred with rust. On the lid, faint but still legible, were 4 words carved by hand. "Keep this place kind." Michael brushed the dust away. "Well, that's a hell of a request." He forced the lock open. Inside were old photographs, sepia tones fading into time. A man in fishing overalls stood beside the same stream outside. A woman with sun-worn skin smiled beside him, and a boy of 12 held up a trout-like treasure. Beneath the photos lay a folded letter, the paper yellowed but steady. "If you find this, you're standing where good things begin again. The mountain gives back what we give to it. Keep it kind, and it will keep you." He stared at the handwriting until the letters blurred. Something deep inside, something long sealed, stirred like thawing ground. For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. Buddy pressed his head against Michael's arm, eyes calm and knowing. "You hear that, soldier?" Michael murmured. "Looks like we've got orders again." The afternoon passed quietly. Michael cleared soot from the chimney, patched cracks with bits of cloth, and oiled the door hinges until they no longer screamed when opened. His body ached, but there was comfort in the motion, the same patience he'd once used to defuse explosives now fixing a home board by board. As dusk fell, the world turned blue. The light dimmed into something soft and forgiving. Michael started a fire, feeding it small twigs until the orange glow filled the cabin. Buddy curled by the hearth, eyes half closed. Michael stirred a dented can of soup and caught himself humming, a melody from years ago, one that used to fill quiet moments between air raids. It had no words, just the shape of breath and memory. A soft knock broke the rhythm. He froze, hand reaching instinctively for the wrench beside him. The knock came again, gentle, hesitant. When he opened the door, Sarah Linwood stood there, cheeks flushed from the climb, a paper bag clutched to her chest. Her car was parked somewhere below the trail, tires half buried in snow. She must have walked the last mile through the drifts. "I figured you might need a few things," she said, voice clouding in the cold. "Matches, bread, a couple blankets." Michael blinked. "You didn't have to do that." "Maybe not," she said, "but I didn't want to regret not trying." She stepped inside, brushing snow from her sleeves. The firelight softened her sharp features. Up close, he saw how her skin was pale and freckled, how fatigue clung to her shoulders like another coat. She had the look of someone who'd kept too many promises for other people and too few for herself. Buddy sniffed her boots, then wagged his tail once. "He's a good judge of character," Sarah said with a faint smile. "He's saved me more times than I've saved him," Michael replied. She looked around the cabin. "It's not much, but it's standing. That counts for something these days." He nodded. "You knew the man who lived here, right? Elijah Drew?" Her gaze drifted to the fire. "Yes. He used to bring trout down to town. Said this stream never froze, even in February. People thought he was exaggerating, but..." She smiled faintly. "Looks like he wasn't?" Michael tore a piece of bread from the loaf she'd brought. "Seems he left the place a message, too." He pointed at the chest on the mantel. Sarah read the words aloud. "Keep this place kind." She nodded slowly. "That sounds like Elijah." When she left, twilight had thickened into night. She paused on the porch, pulling her scarf tighter. "I'll check in next week. Roads get slick fast up here. Don't let yourself get trapped alone." "Not alone," he said, glancing toward Buddy. Her smile lingered, small but sincere. "Then maybe you'll both make it through." After she disappeared down the path, Michael sat back by the fire, breaking bread for himself and Buddy. The crust was hard, but it tasted like mercy. Outside, wind swept through the trees, pushing flakes across the stream until they hissed against the warm surface and vanished. The cabin groaned once, the sound deep and slow, not complaint, but recognition, like an old friend remembering how to breathe. Michael lay beside Buddy, the dog's fur warm against his side. The hum of the stream threaded through the quiet. For the first time in years, sleep came without ghosts. In his dream, he stood by the stream as the ice cracked open and water ran bright and alive beneath. Somewhere in the sound, a voice whispered, not loud, not clear, but enough to believe. "It's okay to stay." And outside, under the patient weight of the mountain, the land seemed to exhale, warm, steady, alive. The next morning broke with a fragile sun, pale and uncertain, casting soft gold over the snow-crusted pines. Steam still drifted from the warm stream beside the cabin, curling gently in the crisp air like breath from the earth itself. Michael stepped outside, his boots crunching into a mix of snow and half-thawed soil. The cold bit at his cheeks, but the warmth from the stream brushed against his hands, a reminder that even in the dead of winter, something beneath was still alive. He carried an old tin cup filled with the last of their dried beans. They were leftovers from weeks of living out of the truck, split, cracked, and nearly useless. But now, standing beside the patch of damp ground near the water, he turned them over in his palm like relics. "All right," he murmured, half to himself, half to the land. "Let's see if you remember how to give." Buddy followed, his fur glinting with frost that melted as he neared the steam. The dog's breath came in small, white clouds, his tail swaying lazily. Michael dug shallow holes with the edge of an old trowel he'd found in the shed, his movements slow but deliberate. Each bean dropped into the soil with a quiet promise. He stood for a long moment afterward, hands on his knees, listening to the trickle of the water and the distant creak of frozen trees. "If this ground ever healed someone," he said softly, "maybe it can heal me too." The voice that answered wasn't his own. "That's a fine thought for a cold morning." Michael turned. A woman stood at the edge of the clearing, a wool shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She was in her early 50s, tall but round at the edges, with a sturdy frame built by work, not leisure. Her cheeks were ruddy from the wind, and her hair, gray streaked with honey brown, was tucked beneath a knitted cap. She carried a basket covered in cloth, and from it came the faint scent of honey and corn. "Didn't mean to startle you," she said, stepping closer. "Name's Linda Holt. I keep the bee farm down the ridge." Her voice had a low warmth to it, touched with the mountain drawl of someone who had never hurried through a sentence in her life. Michael straightened, brushing dirt from his hands. Bee farm? This time of year? She smiled, a soft pull at one corner of her mouth. They sleep same as we do. Winter's just a longer night. I was checking the hives and saw your smoke. Folks in town been whisperin' there's a man living up at the old Drew place. Figured I'd see for myself. Buddy trotted up to her, sniffed her boots, and wagged his tail once, a rare endorsement. Linda crouched to scratch behind his ears. Well now, you're a handsome one. Not much company up here, huh? Just him, Michael said, and the ghosts that haven't learned they're gone. She chuckled, not unkindly. Ain't we all ghosts of something? From the basket, she handed him a wrapped bundle. Inside were 2 squares of cornbread still warm, a small jar of honey sealed in wax, and a folded wool blanket. You look like you could use all 3. He nodded, taken aback by the gesture. You didn't have to. Linda waved off the protest. Nobody has to do much these days. That's why the world feels colder than it ought. Michael smiled faintly. You sound like someone who's had to stay kind on purpose. She met his gaze with eyes the color of green glass, steady, full of miles walked and people forgiven. When you tend to bees, you learn a thing or two about patience. Sting's part of the gift, same as the honey. They stood by the stream for a while, the sound of running water between them. Then Linda said, You know, there's stories about this place. Folks say that water's not just warm, it's healing. My daddy swore a man once mended a broken leg here, right in that current. Michael crouched beside the stream, letting his fingertips brush the surface. It was warmer than it should have been, the heat faint but steady, like breath through skin. Maybe your daddy wasn't wrong. She smiled. Or maybe he just wanted to believe good things could come from forgotten places. Michael nodded, the words landing heavier than he expected. If this land really does heal, maybe it's my turn to give something back. Linda looked around the clearing, the repaired roof, the smoke rising from the chimney. Looks like you already are. She tightened her shawl and glanced toward the ridge. If you need anything, sugar, soap, company, you holler. I'm only 2 bends down the trail. Appreciate it, he said. As she walked away, the snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting between them. Linda's figure disappeared into the pale trees, leaving only the faint scent of honey behind. Michael went back to the cabin. Inside, Buddy lay stretched out near the hearth, one paw twitching in his sleep. The fire had burned low, but the stones still radiated warmth. Michael fed it a few twigs, watching the flames lick back to life. Steam from the nearby spring fogged the window glass, and for the first time, the cabin didn't feel like a refuge. It felt like home. That afternoon, he carried water from the stream to wash the floorboards. Beneath the grime, the wood showed hints of its old color. As he scrubbed, he found himself humming again, an aimless tune, somewhere between prayer and habit. He didn't notice Sarah's arrival until her voice broke the quiet. You're working too hard. Michael turned. She stood in the doorway, her hair tucked under a gray scarf, cheeks flushed from the cold. In her hands was a folded newspaper and a tin cup of coffee. Town's gossip travels faster than snowmelt, she said. They're saying the mountain's got a new keeper. He smiled. That what they call a man who doesn't know when to quit? Or one who finally learned how to stay? She set the cup on the table and glanced at the small patch of turned soil outside the window. You're planting beans in winter? Maybe, he said, wiping his hands. Or maybe I'm just giving Hope something to do. Sarah's eyes softened. That's the most foolish, beautiful thing I've heard all week. They talked as the fire burned, their voices blending with the crackle of wood and the hum of the wind. Sarah told him about her son, a mechanic stationed in North Carolina, and how she hadn't heard from him in months. Her voice trembled only once when she said it. Michael didn't press, just nodded, letting silence hold what words couldn't. When she left, twilight stretched long over the ridge. The first stars blinked through the mist. Michael sat on the porch, Buddy resting beside him, both watching the thin curls of steam rising from the stream. The soil he'd turned that morning had already softened, dark and warm against the snow. He placed a hand over it, as if checking for a pulse. Feels alive, he whispered. Buddy's tail brushed his boot, a quiet answer. From the trees, a single bee drifted toward the stream. Out of season, golden wings catching the last of the light before vanishing into the dark. Michael watched it go and smiled. Inside, the fire crackled. The warmth spread through the floorboards, through the air, through something deeper. It wasn't much, a cabin half stone, half heart, but it was enough. And that night, as he drifted into sleep, he dreamed of roots spreading through the earth beneath him, carrying warmth through the cold, turning the ground itself into a promise kept. January came with the kind of silence that only mountains know before a storm. The wind had changed, colder, hungrier, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Michael could sense it in the way the trees leaned, in how the stream's mist clung lower to the ground in Buddy's unease. The dog paced near the door that morning, ears twitching, gaze fixed toward the northern ridge where clouds were building like smoke from an unseen fire. By afternoon, the light had vanished. Gray Hollow disappeared behind a curtain of snow. The flakes came thick and fast, stinging against the windows, drumming on the patched roof Michael had fixed just weeks before. He worked quickly, reinforcing the cabin door with planks and sealing the chimney's edges with rags. "It'll hold," he said aloud, though no one had asked. Buddy whined low, pressing his nose to the crack beneath the door. Michael crouched beside him, resting a hand on the dog's neck. "We've seen worse, haven't we?" But the words lacked conviction. The storm hit full force that night. Wind screamed through the trees, bending pines until they cracked like bones. Snow piled against the windows until they were no longer windows at all, just pale walls of ice. Inside, the fire burned weakly, its light trembling over the cabin's wooden ribs. Michael kept feeding it, his face gaunt in the orange flicker. By dawn, the storm hadn't broken. The temperature had dropped so low that even the air inside stung when breathed. The stream outside had thickened, steam rising in heavy curls as the hot water fought the cold's chokehold. It was the only thing moving in the frozen world, its quiet defiance a pulse of life. Michael tried to shovel the snow from the door, but the drift came up to his chest. He gave up and started checking the roof instead. It groaned under the weight of ice, threatening collapse. "We'll ride it out," he said to Buddy, though both knew it wasn't up to them anymore. That afternoon, a heavy crack split the valley, deep and low, like thunder trapped underground. Buddy leapt to his feet, hackles raised. The sound came again, closer this time. Michael grabbed his coat and stepped outside into the blinding white. Snow whipped across his face. He could barely see the tree line, but Buddy charged ahead, barking into the storm. "Buddy, stay close!" The dog ignored him, darting toward the stream's edge where the snow seemed to shift unnaturally. Michael followed, stumbling through drifts until the ground trembled beneath his boots. A sudden roar, the sound of earth giving way, and the bank beside the stream collapsed. Snow and soil slid downward, revealing a raw wound in the land. A dark crack from which steam poured, thick and swirling. "Buddy!" Michael shouted, fear rising in his throat. The German shepherd stood at the edge, paws steady, tail stiff. His ears were flattened, but his body was angled protectively toward the fissure. Michael approached slowly. The air around the opening shimmered with heat. Steam rose in great breaths, fogging his glasses and dampening his beard. When he reached out, the ground radiated warmth through his gloves. He knelt, pressed his bare palm to the exposed soil, and felt it. "Nuak am," he whispered, half in disbelief. "It's warm." Buddy gave a soft, triumphant bark, as if confirming it wasn't imagination. The dog sniffed the steam, then stepped back, shaking his fur free of melting snow. Michael crouched closer, letting the heat soak into his frozen fingers. Beneath the hiss of the vent, he heard the faint gurgle of water moving deep underground, a heartbeat, steady and patient. The storm above howled, but the ground below pulsed with quiet life. He understood then that this wasn't destruction. It was revelation. He rushed back inside, stripping off his soaked coat and boots. Grabbing an old tin bucket, he returned to the fissure. Steam thickened around him, turning the world to silver fog. He filled the bucket with water and hurried back to the cabin. It was hot to the touch, nearly boiling. Inside, he poured a bit into a pan and set it near the hearth, the room filled with vapor, gentle and clean. For the first time in days, the chill retreated. "Looks like the mountain's got its own heartbeat," he murmured. Buddy circled twice, then lay down beside the bucket, tail thumping against the floorboards. As the hours passed, Michael brought in more of the water. He poured some into cracks along the walls, watching the ice melt where it touched. Soon, warmth radiated through the small cabin like a breath spreading through lungs. He made a crude pipe from a hollow branch, channeling the warm flow closer to the foundation. Steam began curling up through the gaps in the floor, filling the cabin with a soft haze. That night, when the storm's fury reached its peak, Michael and Buddy sat near the hearth, their faces lit by both firelight and the glow of rising mist. The cabin no longer felt fragile. It felt alive, breathing, humming, healing. Sometime after midnight, there was a knock on the door. Michael hesitated before opening it. Snow swirled in, along with a figure bundled in layers of wool. It was Cal Turner, one of the county's road workers. A tall man, in his early 60s, built like an oak, broad-shouldered, gray-bearded, with hands cracked by years of asphalt and frost. His cheeks were raw, and his voice rasped when he spoke. "Truck slid off near the ridge," he said, shivering. "Can't see 10 feet ahead. Mind if I wait it out?" Michael pulled him inside without question. "You're lucky to be walking," he said, closing the door behind him. "You'd freeze out there." Cal sank near the fire, hands outstretched. "Thought I saw smoke from the road. Didn't expect this place to be standing again." Michael poured him a tin cup of warm stream water. Cal took a sip, eyes widening. "What in God's name? This is hot." "Gift from the mountain," Michael said quietly. "Showed itself this morning." Cal shook his head slowly. "Elijah used to talk about that. Said the land down here wasn't done giving. Guess he was right." The storm howled outside for 2 more days. Cal stayed, helping Michael reinforce the roof and dig a trench to channel runoff from the spring. When it finally passed, the world outside was remade. Snow still blanketed the trees, but the stream ran free, glowing faintly with steam. Cal stood at the door, pulling on his gloves. "You ought to tell the county about this," he said. "Could heat half the valley." Michael shook his head. "Let's keep it quiet a while. Some things need time to stay pure." Cal studied him for a moment, then smiled, a deep wrinkled thing that reached his tired eyes. "You're a good man, Hart. World could use a few more who listen to the ground before they dig it up." When he left, Michael stood in the doorway, watching the man's figure fade into the snow. Buddy pressed against his leg, looking up with calm, amber eyes. "We'll keep it kind," Michael said softly, "just like the old man wanted." He turned back toward the cabin. Steam curled around the porch posts like gentle fingers. Inside, warmth pooled in every corner. Buddy yawned, stretched, and rested his head on Michael's boot. Outside, the mountain sighed, its gift given, its secret safe. Word traveled faster than thaw. By mid-February, whispers of the miracle spring at Gray Hollow had drifted down to the towns along Route 19. Truckers stopped at diners to trade stories about a mountain that steamed even in blizzards. Old miners nodded and said they had heard something like it before, back in the 50s, before the land went quiet. And somewhere between gossip and greed, one man decided to see for himself. His name was Travis Hale, 42, a real estate investor from Knoxville who wore success like armor. He arrived one morning in a black SUV polished so clean it seemed wrong against the mud road. Hale was tall, trim, and cold in his movements, the kind of man who smiled only when he was already sure he'd win. His hair, dark and gelled, matched the crisp lines of his overcoat. His jaw was freshly shaved, his eyes a slate blue that measured everything before him like a balance sheet. When he stepped out of the car, the air of Gray Hollow bit him instantly, frosting the edges of his sunglasses. He tucked his gloved hands into his coat pockets and looked around. Steam curled lazily from the slope ahead, rising from the small valley where Michael's cabin sat, half buried in snow and stone. "Hot water in the middle of January," Hale muttered. "That's money talking." He made his way up the narrow trail, his expensive shoes sinking deep into slush. At the top, the cabin came into view, smoke drifting from the chimney, the faint shimmer of steam rising from the stream that cut behind it. A German shepherd watched from the porch, head low, eyes wary. Buddy didn't bark, just stood his ground, tail stiff. Hale stopped, straightened his coat, and called out, "Hello there, anyone home?" The cabin door opened, and Michael stepped out. His clothes were worn but clean, his beard trimmed, and his eyes calm in the cold light. "Depends who's asking." "Travis Hale," the man said, flashing a practiced smile. Heard about your little miracle up here. Thought I'd take a look for myself. Michael said nothing, waiting. Hale pulled a folded packet of papers from his inner coat pocket. I'm a developer. I specialize in, let's say, giving old places new life. Resorts, spas, vacation cabins, projects that bring jobs and comfort to forgotten towns. And you, my friend, seem to be sitting on a gold mine. Funny, Michael said quietly. I thought it was just water. Hale chuckled, but there was an edge under it. That's the beauty of it. People pay a fortune for what nature gives free. You've got a geothermal source here. With a little engineering, we could build something remarkable. I'm prepared to buy this land outright, or, if you prefer, make you a partner. You'd get a solid percentage, enough to fix this place up proper, maybe even retire. Michael looked past him toward the road, where tire tracks cut through the snow like scars. You think the mountain cares about percentages? I think the mountain doesn't care at all, Hale replied. But people do, and people pay. He stepped closer, boots crunching in the frost. Look, Mr. Hart. Mr. Hart, I'm offering you something fair, hell, generous. The county's going to hear about this spring soon enough. Once they do, they'll start asking questions, sending inspectors. Then you'll have taxes, permits, liabilities. Do yourself a favor, sell now while you've still got leverage. Buddy moved between them, a low rumble deep in his chest. Hale froze. Easy, dog, he said, voice suddenly thin. Michael didn't move. You're standing too close, he said simply. For a moment, neither man spoke. Wind brushed through the pines, carrying the faint hiss of the stream. Hale's jaw flexed. He took a slow step back and adjusted his coat. You're making a mistake, Mr. Hart. I'm not your enemy. But mark my words, you won't be able to hold on to this forever. Good land doesn't stay unclaimed long. Michael's gaze didn't waver. I've seen men destroy things they didn't take time to understand. Not again. Hale's smile returned, sharper now. We'll see. He turned, crunching down the path toward his car. Buddy followed him to the edge of the clearing, barking once. Short, hard, final. The SUV's engine roared to life, echoing down the valley. When the sound faded, only the wind remained. Michael stood there a long while, his breath rising in slow clouds. The papers Hale had left behind fluttered near the porch, caught in the draft. He picked them up, skimmed the numbers, offers, projections, valuations that meant nothing to the land itself, and fed them to the fire. The flames took them quickly, curling black at the edges. Buddy came to sit beside him, head resting against Michael's leg. Guess he's not the last one, Michael said softly. Word's out now. The dog gave a quiet huff, as if agreeing. That evening, Sarah stopped by with a basket of dried herbs and a jar of preserves. Her cheeks were pink from the walk, her coat dusted with snow. Heard someone from the city was sniffing around, she said. Linda saw a black car by the ridge. Michael nodded. He came by, wants to buy the spring. Sarah frowned. And you said no? I said not yet, but I think he already took that as forever. She studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. You're not wrong to hold your ground. This place, it's not just dirt and water anymore. It's starting to matter to people again. You can't put that in a contract. Buddy nudged her hand, tail wagging once. Sarah scratched behind his ears, then looked out at the rising steam beyond the window. It's strange, she said softly. That water looks alive, like it's breathing with the land. Michael followed her gaze. Maybe it is. Later, after she left, Michael stood outside with Buddy. The night was still, the stars sharp and cold. Steam from the stream drifted upward, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Somewhere below, the mountain murmured, a low, steady rumble, not threatening but watchful, as if aware of the world above it. Michael crouched, resting a hand on Buddy's back. They'll come again, he said quietly. More of them. Papers, promises, numbers. But as long as there's fire and you by my side, we stay. Buddy leaned into him, eyes reflecting the firelight from inside the cabin. The wind rose briefly, brushing through the trees, scattering snowflakes across the ground. And in the hush that followed, Michael swore he could hear the faintest sound of water beneath his boots, steady, warm, alive. By early February, the mountains began to loosen their grip on winter. Snow still clung to the ridges, but the air carried a gentler edge. Steam from the spring drifted higher now, visible even from the road below, a ribbon of silver that caught the morning sun. What began as one man's refuge was quietly turning into something larger. Michael had been working since dawn, driving posts into the soft earth beside the stream. The ground, warmed from beneath, gave easily. His palms were raw from hammering, but he didn't seem to notice. Behind him, the cabin stood steady, its chimney breathing a faint line of smoke. Buddy trotted back and forth between piles of wood in the fire pit, tail wagging with quiet purpose. "You're getting good at supervision," Michael said, setting another beam in place. The dog tilted his head, as if considering whether to take credit. The first guests arrived just after noon. A pickup truck rumbled up the ridge, tires grinding over mud and melting ice. Inside were two men in their 50s, faces wind-burned and cautious, like soldiers still scanning for threats long after the war. The driver stepped out first, a tall man with a heavy frame and a limp that told its own story. His name was Raymond Cole, a former medic from Kentucky, now 53, with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too many long nights. He wore a patched army jacket and carried a duffel that looked older than he was willing to admit. "Name's Ray," he said, voice deep and rough. "Sarah back in town told me to find the man who built himself a miracle." Michael wiped his hands on his jeans. "You found the man, not sure about the miracle." The second man climbed out slower. Luis Ortega, 41, smaller but broad-shouldered, with brown skin weathered by desert heat, and a sleeve tattoo that disappeared under his flannel. He was quiet, his movements careful, his gaze sharp but uncertain, like a man who hadn't trusted peace in a long time. Ray nodded toward the stream. "She told us you were making a place for veterans. Didn't think you meant literal hot water." "Nature did most of the work," Michael said. "I just built the walls." They followed him toward the half-finished cabins, simple structures of pine and stone, each with a small door, a cot, and a wooden tub fed by the spring's water. The steam rose gently between them, carrying a scent of cedar and iron. Luis crouched beside one of the tubs, dipping his fingers in. "It's warm," he said, surprised. "Stays that way year-round," Michael said. "Good for sore backs, busted knees, bad dreams." Ray gave a dry chuckle. "You got a cure for those last ones. You'll have a line down the highway." Buddy wandered between them, sniffing boots, accepting a scratch behind the ear. When Luis reached out, the dog leaned in, a small gesture, but one that broke the stiffness in the air. Michael motioned toward the main cabin. "There's stew inside if you're hungry. You can help me finish the rest after." By dusk, two more men had arrived. One was Tom Riley, 46, rail-thin, with a missing finger and a laugh that came too easily, as if trying to drown something darker. The other was Gerald Doc Mason, a retired field nurse in his early 60s, broad-shouldered but stooped, with spectacles that fogged every time he exhaled. He'd driven up from Virginia in an old RV that now doubled as a supply truck. Together, they built. The sound of hammers and saws echoed through the hollow, mingling with the rhythm of the stream. They joked, argued, and worked in silence when words failed. At night, they ate by the fire, potatoes, beans, whatever Sarah and Linda brought from town. The women stopped by often now, their visits as steady as the sunrise. Linda always came with jars of honey and bandages, her hair tucked into a red scarf. "Sweetness and mending," she'd say with a wink. Sarah brought blankets and canned soup, her calm presence steadying the group whenever tempers rose. "You're building more than cabins here," she told Michael one evening. "You're building a reason." That first night, with everyone settled, the fire burned bright. The men sat in a rough circle, their faces drawn by the light. Buddy lay between them, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. Outside, the wind had quieted, and the world seemed to lean in just to listen. No one spoke for a long while. Then Ray said, "I haven't slept through a night since Afghanistan." Silence again, thick, familiar. Then Luis looked into the flames. "Try staying tonight," he said quietly. "Might surprise you." Ray gave a faint smile. "If I do, you're getting all the credit." The laughter that followed was small, uneven, but real. As the fire cracked, the men began to talk. Not all at once, not in complete sentences, but enough. About convoy routes, desert nights, faces they couldn't forget. About how noise made them flinch and silence made them worse. No one interrupted, The flames did the talking when words ran out. Michael listened more than he spoke. He stared into the fire, thinking how strange it was that heat, something once feared, weaponized, was now the thing holding them together. Buddy occasionally nudged a hand, sensing when someone's breath hitched too long. It wasn't comfort as much as presence, and somehow that was better. When the stories ran dry, they sat again in quiet. The sound of the stream filled the space between them, soft and constant. Snow fell, thin as ash. Louis stirred the embers with a stick. "What do we call this place?" Michael looked up. "It already has a name," he said. "Gray Hollow Warm Stream." Ray repeated it slowly, as if testing the taste of the words. "Sounds like somewhere worth staying." The next morning, the valley woke to sunlight, filtering through mist. Steam drifted across the cabins like a low fog. The men rose early, drawn to the tubs. Ray eased himself into one, the heat wrapping around his joints like forgiveness. Luis followed, eyes closing as the warmth touched the scars along his arm. Michael watched from the porch, Buddy at his side. The men weren't healed, not yet, but something had changed. The tension in their shoulders had softened. The laughter came easier. Linda and Sarah arrived later that day, bringing breakfast and tools. Sarah looked around at the cabins, the footprints in the snow, the smoke rising from every chimney. "Looks like Hope's learning how to build," she said. Michael smiled faintly. All it needed was a place to root. That evening, when the sun dipped behind the ridge, the fire burned again. The men sat closer this time. Someone hummed a tune that none of them quite remembered, and the others joined in, their voices low and rough but full. Buddy slept in the center of the circle, tail tapping softly against the dirt, and above them, the mountain stood silent and steady, as if watching over its newest keepers. The first days of March brought the sound of melting. Snow loosened its hold on the ridges, and the trees exhaled mist as if the whole mountain were finally breathing again. Steam rose from the spring in gentle waves, blending with the fog that curled over Gray Hollow like silk. The cabins stood warm and alive, their wooden walls shining with dew. What had once been a refuge was now a place of healing, whispered about far beyond the valley. Michael was repairing a fence post when he saw the dust of a car winding up the trail. Visitors had become common, veterans, wanderers, people carrying invisible wounds. But something about this car made him pause. It was a small silver sedan, slow and careful on the uneven road. When it stopped, the driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. She was perhaps in her late 60s, tall but slightly stooped, her silver hair tied neatly beneath a wool hat. Her face carried the fine lines of both strength and sorrow. She wore a thick navy coat and clutched a cane carved with ivy patterns. When she smiled, it was the kind that had learned to hide pain behind grace. "Excuse me?" she called softly. "Is this the place they call Gray Hollow Warm Stream?" Michael wiped his hands and approached. "Yes, ma'am, you've found it." "I was told there's healing water here," she said, her voice trembling slightly with the effort of climbing the slope. "My doctor called it unconventional, but I thought I'd see for myself before giving up on these knees." Buddy trotted forward, tail waving cautiously. He sniffed the woman's gloved hand, then sat down beside her as though claiming her safety. The woman laughed quietly. "Well, aren't you a fine gentleman?" Michael smiled faintly. "He's a good judge of character. Name's Michael, and this is Buddy." "Margaret Hale," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for having us." The name made Michael still. Hale. He looked at her more closely. Same sharp cheekbones, same steel-gray eyes as the man who'd once stood in that very spot with papers in his hand. But this woman's eyes were different, gentle, unguarded. "Would you like to rest inside first?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. "I'd rather see the water," she replied with quiet determination. He led her along the stone path toward the spring. The morning sun glinted off the surface, where steam rose like prayers into the air. Margaret paused, leaning on her cane, her eyes shining with something between disbelief and awe. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Michael knelt by the pool, testing the temperature. Warm, steady, clean, perfect for the joints. "If you'd like, I can help you soak your legs." She nodded, removing her boots with slow, deliberate motions. Her skin was pale and thin, marked with the soft bruising of age. Michael steadied her arm as she eased herself down onto the wooden ledge. The water lapped against her calves, swirling with silver light. At first, she simply closed her eyes. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire nearby and Buddy's quiet breathing. Then she exhaled, a long, trembling sigh that seemed to carry years of pain. "It's warm," she murmured. "But not just the water. The air feels different here." Michael smiled. "That's what they all say." She stayed the night in one of the smaller cabins. Linda brought honey tea, Sarah prepared soup, and the veterans, Ray, Luis, Tom, and Doc, helped light lanterns along the path. The valley glowed that evening, like a heartbeat spread across the snow. Over the next few days, Margaret returned to the spring each morning. Michael noticed how her steps grew surer, how she no longer leaned so heavily on her cane. One morning, she laughed outright, a sound clear and young, startling even herself. "You've done something remarkable here," she said as they watched the steam drift across the valley. "People come to heal, and they actually do. I haven't seen kindness like this in a long time." Michael shrugged lightly. "The land does most of the work. We just give it room." She studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "You remind me of someone I once knew," she said. "My son, he's a builder too, though in a different way. He sees value everywhere, but sometimes forgets what it's worth." Michael's hand tightened slightly on the mug of coffee he held. "Does he now?" "Yes," she said quietly. "He used to talk about mountains like these, how land could be shaped, developed, turned into something grand. But sometimes we forget that not everything needs improving. Some things just need keeping." Buddy lifted his head, sensing the shift in the air. Michael looked at her and finally asked, "What's your son's name, Mrs. Hale?" She met his gaze without flinching. "Travis." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind moved through the pines, carrying the smell of thawing earth. Margaret looked down at her hands. "I know he came here before. He told me about it afterward. Angry, frustrated. Said a man had refused to sell him paradise." Michael said nothing. "He's not a bad man," she continued softly. "Just lost. I was too for a long time. My husband passed before Travis turned 10. I raised him alone, working 2 jobs, teaching him that survival meant control. I suppose he learned that lesson too well." She turned toward him, eyes glistening. "If you refused him, you did right." Michael's voice was low. "He wasn't ready to see what this place really is." Margaret nodded. "And now I think he might be." That evening, she wrote a letter by lantern light. Her handwriting was slow but firm. "Travis, if you once came here to claim this place, come back instead to understand it. The man who lives here didn't build for himself, but for others. If you want to honor me, help him keep it alive." She handed the envelope to Sarah the next morning, asking her to post it with the town courier. Then she sat by the spring one last time. Buddy lay beside her, tail flicking lazily. She reached down to scratch behind his ears. "You've got a good guardian here," she said to Michael. "He's the soul of the place," Michael replied. A week passed before the SUV returned, but this time, when Travis Hale stepped out, his face was different, less polished, more human. He wore jeans and a flannel jacket, his eyes rimmed with fatigue, but softened by something Michael hadn't seen before. "My mother sent me," he said simply. "She's well," Michael said. "The water helped her." Travis nodded. "She told me." He looked around, taking in the cabins, the veterans working along the stream, the sound of laughter drifting between hammer strikes. "You built all this." "We built it," Michael corrected. "The land did the rest." Travis reached into the truck bed and pulled out 2 crates. "Solar panels, some filtration equipment. I brought what I could get my hands on quickly, not to change it, just to help." Michael regarded him for a long moment, then nodded. "We can use it." Travis hesitated, then extended his hand. "I'm not here to buy, Michael. I'm here to make it right." Michael shook it, firm and steady. "Then you're welcome here." That night, the fire burned brighter than usual. Margaret's letter had brought not just her son, but a promise fulfilled. The men worked alongside Travis, installing panels on rooftops and connecting pipes to the clean water system. Buddy stayed near, weaving between their legs, his ears twitching at every sound. When the last light went up, the valley shimmered in a soft golden glow, blending with the silver steam of the spring. Travis looked out over it all and whispered, almost to himself, "She was right. This place doesn't need to be built. It needs to be protected." Michael smiled. "Then protect it with us." And beneath the stars, surrounded by laughter and rising warmth, Gray Hollow finally felt whole. March arrived with the sound of water. The last of the snow melted into rivulets that fed the stream, turning Gray Hollow into a misty cradle of life once more. The valley that had once been brittle and cold now glowed with new greens, tender shoots pushing through thawed soil, as if the mountain itself had chosen to begin again. Michael stood at the edge of the water, watching sunlight fracture across its surface. The steam rose in ribbons, soft and golden in the morning light. Buddy lay nearby, his muzzle silvered with age, his fur no longer the dark sheen of their first winter, but a mix of brown and gray. He breathed slowly, contentedly, eyes half closed. The faint breeze ruffled the fur on his back, but he didn't stir. Gray Hollow, Warmstream had changed in ways Michael could never have planned. The cabins had multiplied, now standing in a gentle crescent along the spring. Each one had been built by the hands of men who'd once thought they were finished with the world. Veterans, drifters, people who'd forgotten how to dream. Now they gardened, built benches, carved wooden figurines for travelers passing through. The sound of laughter had replaced the silence that used to haunt these hills. Linda's bee boxes lined the meadow, painted in soft shades of blue and yellow. She moved among them in her thick canvas suit, veil loose, her brown hair tied up under her hood. Bees buzzed lazily around her as she checked the frames. "They're thriving," she said to Michael one morning. "They like it here. Must be the warmth in the ground." "Maybe they just feel safe," Michael said, smiling. Linda grinned back. "Don't we all?" Near the edge of the wood, Sarah tended a garden bed with a small group of veterans. She had traded her thick winter coat for a flannel shirt and work gloves, her auburn hair escaping in loose curls from under her hat. Her skin, pale but sun-touched now, glowed with health. She knelt beside Luis, who was coaxing a row of beans from the soil. "You plant them too deep, they won't see the light," she said gently. Luis chuckled. "Guess that's what we all learned here, huh?" "About what?" "Not staying buried." Michael watched from afar, his chest tightening in quiet pride. The spring had done what no plan could. It had made broken things remember their purpose. Even Travis had become part of it. He visited every few weeks now, his once starched business shirts replaced with rolled sleeves and calloused hands. He worked beside the others, installing solar pumps, fixing the path, bringing in materials from town. No one mentioned his earlier visit, or the contract he once carried. He didn't bring it up either. One morning, he arrived with a small team of volunteers, 2 college students and an older engineer named Sam Walker, a lean man in his 70s with a thick white beard and the eyes of someone who'd seen too much war and too little peace. He had worked on geothermal systems in the Army decades ago, and now he came to Gray Hollow because the land was whispering something worth listening to. As he put it, Sam's hands were slow but steady as he tested the water flow with a handmade gauge. "You've got a self-feeding cycle here," he told Michael. "Heat, minerals, and runoff all balanced. That's rare." Michael nodded. "Feels like it knows what it's doing." Sam smiled. "Maybe it does. Mountains remember. So do people." They built small channels branching from the stream, not to drain it, but to guide its warmth toward the garden beds and wooden tubs where guests soaked their tired limbs. The veterans joked that they were plumbing for the soul. At night, the valley glowed. Strings of lights powered by the new solar panels lined the paths. The cabins reflected in the water like constellations fallen to earth. Ray's laughter rumbled from the fire pit, joined by Luis's guitar and Doc Mason's soft humming. Sarah and Linda sat nearby, Buddy at their feet, his tail occasionally thumping when someone said his name. It was Linda who noticed him slowing down first. "He's tired, Michael," she said one afternoon as they watched Buddy doze by the water. "He's earned it," Michael replied softly. He crouched beside the dog, running a hand through his fur. "You've done your part, old friend." Buddy's eyes flickered open, calm and trusting. He pressed his nose against Michael's wrist, a silent acknowledgement. The spring steam curled around them, warm as breath. Later that week, they gathered by the stream for what had become a tradition, the planting of the season's first seeds. Everyone was there. Sarah with her sleeves rolled, Travis hauling crates, Ray joking about his bad knees, and Linda humming an old hymn. Michael stood before the stone they had placed near the entrance, newly polished, its surface ready for carving. He took his chisel and began to etch the words slowly, his hand firm despite the tremor that came with exhaustion. The others watched in silence as the phrase took shape. This water remembers kindness. When he finished, he stepped back. The valley was quiet except for the sound of the spring. Travis read the words aloud, his voice thick. "It fits," he said. Sarah nodded. "It's what this place has been from the start," Doc Mason added softly. "It's what kept us alive." That evening, Michael sat by the water, the firelight flickering across his face. Buddy lay beside him, head resting on Michael's boot. Across the valley, laughter echoed. A song, a hammer strike, the rustle of bees returning to their hives. The world was still imperfect, but for once, it was enough. He looked up at the stars. "You did good, boy," he whispered. "You kept me here long enough to see what it could become." Buddy's breathing deepened, steady and peaceful. The steam rose higher. The valley, bathed in soft gold. Spring settled fully over Gray Hollow. Travelers came and went, truckers, hikers, veterans on the long road back to themselves. Some stayed a night, some a month. All left a part of their pain behind and took with them something lighter. The local paper began calling it the Heart of the Mountain. And when a reporter asked Sarah what she thought of Michael Hart, she smiled and said, "He didn't keep the land to live. He lived to keep kindness alive." Years later, the spring still ran warm through the valley. The cabins aged gracefully, vines curling along their walls. Linda's bees multiplied. Sarah's garden grew wild and fragrant. And every morning, the water steamed into the air like a memory retold, gentle, enduring, alive. And if you listen closely, locals say, you can still hear a low bark echo through the mist at dawn, followed by the sound of a man's quiet laughter. The heart of Gray Hollow still beats, in the water, in the work, in every hand that chooses to heal instead of harm. And so, the story of Gray Hollow was never truly about land or warmth, or even the miracle of the mountain. It was about the quiet grace that happens when broken people choose to build instead of bury, to heal instead of hide. Michael's hands, Buddy's loyalty, the veterans' laughter, and the kindness of strangers all became one river, flowing forward, feeding life wherever it touched. Maybe that's the real miracle, not fire from heaven, but love that stays, work that heals, and faith that keeps rising even in the coldest places. God still speaks, sometimes through storms, sometimes through silence, sometimes through a faithful dog who refuses to give up.